Hi, I'm Ron with Cruising This Old Boat, and today I'm going to show you how to build a drawer base unit for your galley. When you go to build a cabinet, you got to make some choices, even before you buy the first piece of lumber. The first is, what kind of trim do you want? There's basically two options you have. One is trimless, and that's like this, where you just have the piece of plywood, unfinished edge. You can paint it, stain it, whatever you want to do. And if you're tight on space, that's probably the way you want to go, is trimless, because all you have is the width of your plywood. If you use 1/2 inch plywood, then you eat up a 1/2 inch. If you have 3/4 inch plywood, you eat up 3/4 inch. The other choice is to go with trim, and that's my preference. It looks nicer, it looks more professional, it looks more high-end, it looks prettier, and this is what it looks like. But generally speaking, trim is going to be at least 1.5 inches wide. If you use a 1x4, you're talking a 3.5 inch wide, unless you rip it. But so basically, you're generally looking at least 1.5 inches width on your trim. That could be valuable space taken up in your cabinetry. Now, another choice you have to make is what kind of wood you want to use on the side. As you can see here, I've used plywood. That's the cheapest, easiest way to do it, and generally accepted. Pretty much everybody uses plywood for your walls these days. You could use plywood just on the back and then use real wood, real boards for the sides, and get away with that. But the problem is the depth. And in this case, this cabinet I'm building is 21 inches deep. They don't make 21 inch wide boards. I wish they did, but they don't. Generally, the widest board you're going to find is 12 inches. So you really need to have access to a joiner, and you have to put together series of boards to end up with a board wide enough to be 21 to 24 inches wide. And I don't have a joiner, and it's a lot of work to get that to where there's no seam showing from board to board. I have done it in furniture before, when I had access to a huge professional shop. It was while I was in the military, and they had a big joiner, and I had lots of time, and I worked it down, and it turned out looking real nice. But generally speaking, nobody's going to care to use plywood. They make plywood with really nice veneers. This one is red oak, is what I work with. The reason I use red oak is because Marie wants these cabinets to be stained and to end up looking like the interior of our salon galley that we currently have, which is supposed to look like teak. I don't know if it really is teak. It could be an oak itself, but we find that the red oak, you throw a cherry colored stain on there, ends up looking a lot like teak. So that's why I'm using red oak. But if you're going to paint it, I wouldn't use red oak. I'd use some other veneer. Another decision you need to make is whether you want a kick plate or not. There's lots of decisions to make when you build cabinets, but on a boat, you'll often see they don't have kick plates just to save space. They often don't use bottom shelves so that you can put stuff all the way to the floor. You just got to decide how you want to go. It's just how you want it. Marie wanted a kick plate on these cabinets to make them look more like a kitchen at home, and also so we don't stub our toes. We did not put a kick plate on the one I built for the forward head, and we have that problem. We're constantly kicking our toe against that cabinet. So she wanted a kick plate for the galley cabinets so that we don't have that issue. And so that's what we're getting ready to do, is cut a kick plate in this next board. What size your kick plate is up to you if you use one. We're doing a 4-inch high kick plate by 3-inch deep. Now, if you're going to build cabinets, you can do it with just a circular saw and a jigsaw, handheld tools, but it's really good if you have access to a couple of big pieces of equipment. One of them is this power mitered saw. because it cuts through that quick and it's nice and straight. I've got a piece of scrap board cut to just be a spacer, so size is unimportant in my opinion, other than a weight consideration. Bigger's better. Gives you a lot more latitude of where to put the drawer slide. That's what's going to mount to this. But you know, as I've said before, you could actually cut a piece to match this whole side and screw it down, and it'd work perfectly. But that just makes it heavier, so you don't want too big of pieces, but within the realm of weight, bigger is better. So we got a piece cut here. Before you mount this, what you want to do is you want to pre-drill the holes, because if your screw has to bite through here as well as the side you're mounting it to, then it may not pull it tight, and it could also splinter your plywood. So pre-drill your holes. I pick a size of drill bit that matches the thread, not the shaft of the screw, but the thread of the screw, because I just want my screw to pass right through this scrap piece and bite into the side. On the ends, you put one on both sides to hold it down. Through the middle, all you gotta do is alternate sides, and that keeps it from warping, but you don't necessarily need two the whole length. Now what we need to do is we're going to need a way to tag the trim, to hold the trim on, and also tag the back to hold this piece to the back of the cabinet. And the way we do that is with a Craig jig. And if you don't own a Craig jig, if you're going to build cabinets, go buy you one, because they just make a world of difference. You have to anticipate everywhere you're going to need one of these jig holes cut or drilled. You need to think about that before you mount the board, because it's so much easier to use it on the jig when it's just the board. But I will tell you, if you mess up, and I have, you can always use the jig on it after the fact. So don't panic too much there, but the more planning you do ahead of time, the easier it is. So I'm gonna show you how to use the Craig jig. Now this is the Craig jig I own. You can't buy this anymore. They quit making this model. They have a newer model that has some sort of like vice grip clamp on thing. Use this little set screw, and you turn this set screw, loosen it up. You adjust this piece right here up and down to fit the thickness of the wood you're working with. We're doing 3/4 inch, so we're going to set it at 3/4 inch. This clamp is adjustable, but there's no set thing. You just adjust it for what kind of tension you want. You want a good grip on your wood so it doesn't move while you're drilling it. Now when you're using a Craig jig, there's a special drill bit you use for that. Now you need to adjust the depth at this thing. It's a preset depth depending on the thickness of your wood. So again, we're drilling into 3/4 inch plywood, so we're going to set this for 3/4 inch. And the way you do that is you lay it on the jig. It's got, well, there's actually several different ways. On my jig, there's a preset place to lay it. You can put it in there and line it up, and just like this, and you make sure that the tip here is at 3/4 inch. Once you get the tip lined up to 3/4 inches, then you're going to use this set screw and tighten it down, and that keeps you so you don't drill too deep or too shallow, either way. If you buy a replacement bit, because you have to do that from time to time as your bit gets dull, the replacement bit have this marking on them where you can just look right on the bit. You don't need anything, and it'll tell you where to put it for 3/4 inch. So that's pretty cool. Now one of the things you have to think about carefully is what side of the board you want to put this jig hole on. I can't tell you how many times in the beginning that I would put it on the wrong side, or even sometimes screw up and put one on one side, flip the board over and put the others on the other side. Yeah, you do stupid stuff. So think very carefully about where you want it. In this case, we're going to screw the board down to here like this. So we want our jig holes to be on the outside. They won't do us any good if they're on the other side after we glue it down. Okay, so all you do, once you determine what side you want to drill it on, which I want this side, you're going to put the board, the side you want the hole to be on, to line up with the holes on the jig itself, and then just line up where you want it. They have line spacings both up here and down here, over here, to help you line it up. So just put it where you want your holes to be. Once you have that done, then you want to adjust your clamp to be the right distance to hold tight. You want it to hold tight. Once you have it in place, then you just take your Craig drill and you put it in the hole, and you're just going to drill slowly. Don't push it, and come in and out, because as you do that, you're kicking the sawdust out. Otherwise it gets built up in there. Once you get your holes drilled on that side, this is going to hold our trim piece down. Then you got to flip it over, because we also want to use this same board to help hold the side to the back of the cabinet, the side piece to the back of the cabinet. So we're going to go ahead and drill a couple holes in here too. All right, we're ready to mount that spacer piece onto the side panel. Anything you do building the cabinet, the screws are there to hold it in place until glue sets. So you want to glue everything. That's what holds it. The glue is stronger than the wood. It will not come apart if done properly, ever. You'll break the wood trying to get the glue to separate. So just always glue everything. You just use regular wood glue. I got the premium, which is indoor outdoor, and so because we're on a boat, stuff gets wet. You glue it, and then you screw it down, and like I say, the screws are there just to hold it until the glue sets. When you glue it, don't get the glue close to the edge. It's a common misconception of people that you need to get glue on the whole piece to hold it down. No, don't do that. Don't get anywhere near the edge, because when you screw it down, it's going to compress it, and it's going to squirt that glue everywhere. So to try to quit from making a mess all over your wood, stay away from the edges. The glue will spread underneath the compression of screwing the piece down and coat a lot of the wood itself. And if every little speck of wood isn't covered with glue, that's okay. Don't worry about it. The glue's just there to hold the piece on, not to create some waterproof bond. Once you have your glue on it, then you're gonna flip the board into place. Make sure you're square on all your sides, lined up where you want to be. And then you're going to clamp it down. And the purpose of the clamp in this case is just to keep the board from moving while you're screwing it down. So you're not trying to achieve anything other than hold your board in place. Now for this, I just use, these are sheetrock screws. They're not necessarily the prettiest in the world, but this whole thing will not be seen once the cabinet is done. Nobody will see these screws. They're completely hidden. And there you have it. Now we just need to do 3 more, and this piece will be ready. The other tool that's really good to have if you're going to build cabinets is a table saw. A table saw allows you to cut long lengths at a precise measurement. It's better for ripping boards than using a circular saw. You're never going to get a straight cut ripping any length of a board using a circular saw. So table saws are really good for getting nice, long, straight cuts. And another advantage is that once you set your guide board up at a given measurement, then you can just cut board after board and not have to remeasure each time and redraw your measuring lines and so forth. You just keep cutting away. All right, so we got all our filler boards in. Again, the reason we did that is so that this trim piece will not block the drawer slide. This fills up the space that this trim piece would make and allows the drawer slide to slide past it. But we also want to, just for added rigidity, we want to put some Kreg drill holes on the other side, and that way we have screws coming in from both directions holding this side piece into the back of the cabinet. All right, as I said before, you glue everything. So we're getting ready to put the side piece on. We're going to run some glue down the edge. Again, you can see I'm not trying to fill the whole thing. You just shoot it down the middle. It'll spread out. We just put this clamp here just to hold the side piece in place until we screw it down. Now when you get ready to screw into the holes you use the Kreg jig for, you use special Kreg screws. You don't go get your own, and you use a special bit on the your screwdriver. And this is a square bit, but it's also long, and you're going to need this length to clear the side, to clear the board. Otherwise your drill is going to just tear the board up, and that's why you need this special one. You just put it in the hole and go for it. And that pulls it nice and tight against the board. Now one of the things you have to be careful about is as your screws pull it tight, sometimes the glue comes dripping out. You want to clean that up as soon as possible, especially if you're going to stain. Where this glue comes over onto your wood, it won't stain. Now luckily this is inside, so it's not as important, but still clean up your glue. Anytime you see it popping out, get that wiped up. So that makes this good and solid all by itself, just standing out there, because you're using those Kreg screws. It also allows you to screw into a face instead of screwing from the other side. You just always have to make sure that you drill your Kreg holes on the side that won't be seen by people, and that's not always intuitive. Sometimes you want to be underneath, sometimes on the top, but you just have to think about where will people see and drill them where they won't. Now the next step that we're ready for is to trim it out. So trim is usually made out of 1x2 material. Doesn't have to be, as I said before, you could make it out of a 1x3, 1x4. It's just up to you aesthetically and also functionally. It may be in an area where you need something wider, but the general rule is 1x2 stock. So I got some 1x2 red oak so that it matches the cabinet. You take your 1x2 trim, you're going to put it lengthways, the whole length top to bottom, and you see how nicely it covers up that edge, just gets rid of it. And then your cross pieces will be inside that, so you'll have two trim pieces. We've already cut them, and they run the whole length up and down, and then your cross pieces will go inside that. Now one thing you want to be aware of when you're measuring for your vertical trim piece is the trim does not go below where the kick plate is. So you see I stop right here, and this is my kick plate underneath it. So that's where it stops. Now when you cut your trim pieces, this is definitely a place you want to use a power miter saw, because you want a nice straight cut. Otherwise, your goal is to not have any more seam showing between the different trim pieces than possible. So you want it to look like it was molded as one big piece. That's your goal. And the best way to achieve that, or get as close as you can to it, is with the straight cut of a power miter saw. All right, we got all the pieces for the trim piece ready, or they're all cut. And so now the next step is that you want to get rid of all this loose wood sticking out everywhere. So the best thing to do is by hand, not by machine. Use it by hand. You're just going to scuff those off of there because they'll be hard to sand off later. But you don't want to do any more than necessary. Just get them off and that's it, because you don't want to round out your corner here. If you round your corner out, then remember I said you want your seams to disappear. They're not going to disappear if they're rounded. Okay, so just enough to get those burrs off there and no more. So now that we got the burrs off, the next step is we're going to use the Craig jig on the trim pieces. The only ones you use that jig on are the horizontal cross pieces. You don't do it at all on the vertical pieces because there's nothing above or below them. So what you do is you put your 1x2 vertically into the jig, and you use the little white lines here to line up the two closest holes so that they're centered as best as you can. Get them as far away from the edges of the 1x2 as you can, and then clamp it down. And then once you clamp it down tight, go ahead and drill your holes. Then just flip it over and do the other side. Now remember, your holes you want to drill into the back side of this trim so that when we're looking at the cabinet, we're not going to see the holes. So always look at your wood ahead of time, figure out which side you want to be the front and which the back. Sometimes it'll make a difference in how the grain looks and so forth. So figure out which front and the back, drill your holes on the back side. Now we're ready to assemble the trim piece, and you do the assembling off the cabinet. Don't try to piece this together on the cabinet. It just won't work out right. Build your entire trim piece off the cabinet, and then you're just going to mount it to the cabinet. So what we're going to do is, remember, you glue everything. So we're going to glue the joint one by one, each joint, and then we're going to screw in the Craig screws. Once we open the glue.
Get your fingers out of the way.
Got my fingers out of the way. Okay. All right, the last thing we need to put on is the other side of the vertical, and then it'll be ready to mount to the cabinet. One thing I do sometimes that you might find helpful is I draw on what I'm constructing. Remember, you're gonna lightly sand this afterwards. Just don't draw real hard. You'll be able to sand it off, or it'll be hidden underneath stuff. So you can draw on it, and that way you can visualize how everything's going to look. So as you can see here, I've drawn where all the trim pieces are going to cross, all the horizontal trim pieces, so I can make sure that my drawer openings are where I want them to be. So just like the trim pieces, you want to get rid of the burrs on the edge of the plywood. Now, I don't do that to every cut I make because a lot of them are buried inside where nobody's ever going to see them. But like this side here, actually when you come through our doorway into the boat, this is the side you look at. So we want it to be nice and clean. Once you put the trim on it, you're not going to be able to sand this very well, so we want to do it now. This is 150 grit is what I use, and you're just going to knock the burrs off. So go ahead and lay your trim piece in place once it's ready. Clamp it down as much as you can, and then go ahead and screw it in place. All right, with that, we have the cabinet done. Now, once you got the wood putty filled in on any cracks that may be there, the next step you want to do is some sanding. You do that for several reasons. First of all, these edges are sharp, and you don't want somebody coming along running their hand down there and cutting their finger open or catching a splinter. So you want to sand that edge to where it's a little bit rounded. Not a lot, just enough to make it smooth if you run your hand on it. The other reason you want to sand it is to get any splinters off, and that's the whole thing. So you want to do the edges in particular, but you want to sand every surface that's going to be exposed to make sure there's no splinters on it, and also to make it smooth and to get rid of any discoloration, particularly your wood putty may discolor the wood somewhat. So you want to sand for all those reasons. Use a high grit sandpaper. I'm going to be using 220 today. You don't want to take too much off. Be careful, don't sand in the same spot too much, because if you look at the thickness of the plywood that's actually the veneer, that actually looks, in my case, like red oak. It's very, very, very thin. You sand through that, and now you just got regular plywood. Okay, once you have it all sanded and prepped, make sure you use a tack cloth to get all the dust off of it, and then you're going to start staining it. Always test your stain on a scrap piece of wood. Make sure it's the right color, and not only color, but how dark do you want to put it on. As you can see by these two boards where we tested our stain, it makes a big difference on how dark you put it on. So you need to make that decision ahead of time, and then put your stain on according to the instructions. And we'll be good to go. And here's the finished kitchen.